You ever make a decision out of pure spite, the kind that feels so satisfying it warms you from the inside out? Well, that's how I ended up owning a lake. Not a cabin, not a boat, not even a slice of property that touched it. The entire lake. It all started with Karen. Now, I know Karen gets thrown around a lot these days, but this woman was a final boss of Karens. Perfect blonde bob, permanent scowl, clipboard always in hand, like she'd been born with it. She was a self-appointed queen of the Brookhaven Meadows HOA, and she thrived on ruining weekends and collecting fines like trophies. I'd moved into Brookhaven for peace and quiet. I didn't even realize there was an HOA until after the ink dried on my mortgage. Then the letters started. $50 fine for my trash and being visible from the street, $100 fine for my truck being unsightly. The kicker? A $200 penalty for my shed being an authorized construction. It was a shed I built with my dad's old tools, the one that actually matched my house better than half the junk people had in their yards. When I went to the HOA meeting to fight it, Karen sat at the head of the table like a dictator, smiling thinly as she said, "Rules are rules." That night, I decided she'd picked the wrong neighbor. Behind the subdivision stretched a wooded slope that led down to Lake Norrell. Beautiful, still, quiet, almost too perfect to exist behind such a miserable place. Kids snuck down there in summer, teens went fishing, and everyone just assumed it was part of the HOA. Karen, of course, acted like she personally owned the water. But one night, curiosity got the best of me. I opened up the county property database, expecting to see Brookhaven Meadows HOA listed as owner. Instead, it said something that made me stop cold. For sale, private parcel. The lake wasn't HOA property at all. It wasn't even in their jurisdiction. It was an unsold leftover from the original developer, just sitting there, ignored for years. And that's when the idea hit me. What if I bought it? 2 weeks later, I sat in the county clerk's office, signing paperwork with the biggest grin on my face. For less than the price of a used car, Lake Norrell and all the land surrounding it was mine. No HOA, no restrictions, no Karen. For a while, I kept my little secret. I started clearing brush, cutting a walking path, and building a small dock where I could fish and relax. I even brought a chair and some cold beer down on weekends. It felt like freedom. Then, one morning, I heard the unmistakable crunch of gravel behind me. "Excuse me," came that nasal tone that could curdle milk. I didn't turn around. "Morning, Karen." "What exactly do you think you're doing?" she demanded. "Fishing," I said. "Pretty sure that's still legal." Her voice sharpened. "This is HOA property. You can't just build whatever you want." I smiled and pulled out my phone. "Actually, I can." I showed her the deed. "See that name? That's me." She frowned. "That's impossible." "Check the county records," I said. "Lake Norrell isn't in the HOA's territory. Never was." Karen looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. "You mean to tell me you own the lake?" "Yep." She blinked a few times, then huffed and turned away. "We'll see about that." And no, she did. 2 days later, new signs appeared along the trail. No trespassing, HOA property, private lake, residents only, violators will be fined. That was the moment I lost it. I yanked one of the signs out of the dirt, marched to her house, and knocked. She opened the door with that smug grin that made my blood boil. "Karen," I said, holding up the sign, "what's this supposed to be?" "Protecting HOA property," she said sweetly. "You can't just claim community land." "This isn't community land," I said. "It's mine. You're trespassing." She crossed her arms. "We'll see what the board says about that." That night, I got an email, notice of violation. The HOA was threatening legal action for unauthorized construction, safety hazards, and destruction of shared natural resources. They demanded I cease all activity on HOA property immediately. Legal action against me for being on my own property. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my phone. But it also lit a fire in me. Karen wanted a fight? I'd give her one, and I'd make sure it hurt her in the only way that truly mattered to an HOA. Her wallet. The next week, I filed a formal cease and desist with the HOA, citing their trespassing and false claims. When they ignored it, I sent them a $500 invoice labeled trespass fee and authorized signage on private property. They ignored that too, so I decided to get creative. I built a proper dock, added benches, a small roof, and even a signboard. Registered the whole thing with the county as a private recreational facility. Then I made my own signs. Private lake, access by permit only $100 per day use fee non-residents and HOA members welcome. Within a week, kids were begging their parents to swim there. Families came to picnic. A few of my cooler neighbors even offered to help maintain it. I didn't charge them. Only the HOA folks who'd ever voted for one of Karen's fines had to pay. And then there was Karen. Every day she came marching down to the water, phone in hand, snapping pictures, muttering about evidence and violations. One time she tried to block the trail with a chain. Another time she screamed that I was stealing from the community. It drove her insane that she couldn't stop me. That's when I started wondering, why do people like Karen need to control everyone else's happiness? What happens when they finally meet someone who won't bend? Because I was done bending. Every complaint she filed, I answered with paperwork. Every threat, I countered with proof. I had the deeds, the survey maps, the permits. I even called the county to confirm it all on record. But Karen didn't quit. She doubled down. Then came the Saturday that changed everything. It was early summer, and I was hosting a small cookout on the dock. Some burgers, drinks, music. A few neighbors, some kids splashing around. Peaceful, happy, until I saw her marching down the hill again, this time with the entire HOA board behind her. Clipboards, cameras, and expressions like they were about to stage a coup. "This ends today," she declared. "You're in violation of community regulations, and this facility will be dismantled immediately." I set down my spatula and looked her dead in the eye. "Karen, you're standing on my property. Again." She ignored me. "We'll see what the county says." "Oh, we will," I said, smiling, "because they are already on their way." She froze. "What?" I pointed up the trail. A county vehicle was rolling in, dust rising behind it. Karen's face drained of color. See, she'd made one complaint too many, and the county decided to investigate her. And that's when things really started to get interesting. When that county truck rolled up the hill that afternoon, the world went still. Karen stood frozen in place, clutching a clipboard like a shield, her lips tight enough to squeeze Diamond out of air. The HOA board members behind her shuffled nervously, whispering to each other. I didn't move. I just leaned on the railing of my dock, coffee in hand, waiting for the show to start. Two inspectors got out, one tall and serious, the other short with a kind of weary I've-seen-it-all expression. They both wore reflective vests, badges clipped to their chests. The tall one stepped forward. "Afternoon," he said. "Who's the property owner here?" "That would be me," I said, waving casually. "James Porter." Before I could finish, Karen's voice sliced through the air like a car alarm. "Excuse me. That's not correct. This is HOA property, and this man is trespassing and conducting unapproved construction." The tall inspector looked down at his clipboard, then up at her. "And you are?" "Karen Duval," she said proudly, straightening her shoulders. "President of the Brookhaven Meadows Homeowners Association. We've filed multiple complaints about this illegal dock and unauthorized public gatherings." The inspector flipped a few pages. "Right. The environmental complaint about an authorized development on HOA land. That's the one," Karen said, beaming. "Finally, someone's doing something about this nonsense." The inspector sighed. "I reviewed your report, but I also reviewed the county property records." He paused just long enough for the silence to sting. "This parcel, Lake Noyle and the surrounding 10 acres, is not owned by your HOA. It is privately owned by Mr. Porter here." Karen's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "That's impossible. The lake has always been considered part of Brookhaven Meadows." "Considered?" the inspector repeated. "Not owned. And that's an important distinction. You can't enforce community rules on private land you don't own or lease." She blinked furiously. That's absurd. Everyone uses this lake. I smiled. And now they can if they pay the $100 fee. The inspector hid a small grin before turning back to her. You and your HOA may actually be liable for placing signs and chains on Mr. Porter's property without consent. I'd advise removing them immediately. You could have heard a pin drop. The board member started fidgeting, avoiding Karen's glare. The shorter inspector added, "Also, if I'm not mistaken, filing false claims of jurisdiction can be considered harassment under county law. I'd tread carefully, Mrs. Duval." Her face turned the color of undercooked shrimp. I gave her a friendly wave. "Appreciate you stopping by, gentlemen." The inspectors nodded and headed back to their truck. Karen didn't say another word. She spun on her heel, her little dog yapping behind her, and stormed up the hill like a hurricane in yoga pants. I figured that'd be the end of it, but I underestimated her ability to turn obsession into an art form. 2 days later, I got another letter taped to my door. Notice of violation, safety and code compliance complaint. Someone had reported my dock as structurally unsafe, my campfire pit as environmental vandalism, and my rental permits as unlicensed commercial activity. Guess who signed it? So I called the inspector again. "Hey, it's James Porter," I said. "Looks like someone's trying to make me famous." He laughed. "We figured as much. Don't worry, we'll handle it." And handle it they did. The next week, a full inspection team came out. They checked every board on my dock, every post, every firing. Karen was right there too, watching from behind her fence, her phone recording every second like she was filming for a courtroom drama. After 2 hours, the inspectors finished. The head guy came over and handed me a signed document. Lake Norrell Recreational Dock. Approved and fully compliant, no violations found. Then he turned to Karen and said, "We've noted repeated nuisance complaints from your organization. Any further false reports will be subject to review." Karen's mouth twitched like she was chewing on a lemon rind. I framed that document and hung it right on my dock post. That summer, the lake exploded with life. Word got around that I'd opened Lake Norrell Park to visitors. Families from nearby towns came to swim, fish, and paddleboard. Couples rented picnic spots. A local band even asked to play a small concert by the water one Friday evening. I let them, charging $5 a head for entry. Even better, a few of my HOA neighbors started showing up sheepishly, asking if they could use the dock for just an hour. "Of course," I said, smiling sweetly. "It's $100 for the day." Some paid. Some walked away muttering. One guy tried to argue he was technically a resident, and I pointed right at the big sign. Private property, HOA members paid double. Karen, meanwhile, was unraveling. I'd see her stalking the property line, phone in hand, whispering furiously to whoever still answered her calls. Once, she yelled across the water that I was corrupting the community. Another time, she sent me a handwritten letter claiming the sound pollution from laughter and splashing was disruptive to local wildlife. I responded by mailing her a $100 invoice for an authorized auditory participation in Lake Norrell Recreational Area. And when she didn't pay, I printed the invoice and nailed it to a post, framed in plastic, right where she could see it from her backyard. But Karen wasn't done yet. In late July, a man in a suit knocked on my door, a lawyer representing the HOA. He handed me a stack of papers thicker than a phone book. "Cease operations," he said. "You're violating community harmony guidelines." Community harmony guidelines? I asked, genuinely laughing, "Is that a law?" He looked embarrassed. "Not exactly, but the HOA is prepared to pursue this." "Sure," I said, "but you might want to check jurisdiction before wasting your retainer." A week later, I got another letter from the same lawyer, this time with an apology. Apparently, their counsel had verified my ownership, and the HOA had no legal standing. I made copies and handed them out at the next HOA meeting. Oh yes, I attended. I was technically still a homeowner there, after all. When I walked in, people started whispering like I was a celebrity. Karen sat at the front, glaring daggers. I smiled, waved, and sat down. When the floor opened for community issues, I raised my hand. I'd like to address the repeated harassment and false claims made by the HOA toward my private property, I said, holding up the lawyer's letter. For transparency, I brought copies for everyone. A few people actually applauded. Karen stood, trembling with rage. This is not appropriate. It's completely appropriate, one of the board members interrupted. Frankly, Karen, we're tired of this. You've been dragging the HOA into a personal feud, and it's embarrassing. Another member nodded. We spent nearly $3,000 in legal consultations over a lake we don't own. Karen's voice cracked. He's making a mockery of this community. No, I said softly. I'm just reminding it what freedom looks like. The room fell silent. Karen grabbed her clipboard, muttered something about ungrateful idiots, and stormed out. That was the last HOA meeting she ever attended. The following month, the HOA held an emergency election. Karen was voted out as president by an overwhelming margin. The new guy, a laid-back contractor named Mike, showed up at my place a few days later. Hey, man, he said, I just wanted to say, good for you. Karen's been terrorizing people for years. You did what we all wanted to do. We shared a beer on the dock, laughing as kids splash in the shallows. A week later, I got a letter, this one polite and professional. The new board wanted to rent the lake for annual HOA events. Their proposal, $500 for one Saturday, with insurance coverage and cleanup included. I stared at it for a long moment, then typed my reply. Dear Brookhaven Meadows HOA, I appreciate your interest in Lake Noel. I'm open to allowing limited community use under these terms. $100 per attendee. $2,000 refundable deposit. All participants must sign waivers acknowledging this is not HOA property. No clipboards allowed. Sincerely, James Porter, owner, Lake Noel. I never heard back, but sometimes, on quiet evenings, I see Karen standing far up on the ridge by her old house, just staring at the lake. Maybe she's wondering how it all slipped away from her. Maybe she's still trying to figure out how I did it. The answer's simple, really. I stopped letting her win. The lake became my refuge, my business, and my sweet, ironic victory. And every time the sun sets over that water, turning it gold and still, I remember that all it took to break her power was a single deed, a few $100s, and a refusal to bend one more inch. Because in the end, revenge doesn't always come with shouting or chaos. Sometimes it comes with a dock, a quiet lake, and the sound of laughter that no HOA rulebook can silence. And if you ever find yourself up against a Karen with a clipboard and too much free time, remember, you don't have to fight her rules. You just have to buy the lake.